Welcome to Rain Narrator channel where we take you on a journey of deep relaxation and complete tranquility with the sound of raindrops adding an atmosphere of tranquility and comfort. Relax, enjoy, and prepare to enter the world of dreams. If you are looking for an ideal way to relax or calm your mind before sleep, you are in the right place. Follow us to get the best stories. It all started on a school trip. The kind of trip that at first seems like just another one of those boring events teachers organized to get us out of the classroom. But this trip, well, this one turned out to be anything but ordinary. I remember the first time I saw her. Her name was Olivia, and she was sitting by the window, staring out at the countryside as we drove toward the mountains. The sunlight hit her face in just the right way, and for a second it felt like the whole world stopped. I had never seen someone so mesmerizing. She wasn't the loudest person in the room, nor the most outgoing, but there was something about her calm presence that drew me in. Something quiet, like she was hiding a story of her own. We didn't talk much at first. I was too shy, honestly, and she was always surrounded by her friends. But I watched her, the way she laughed, the way she would talk with the others in that soft voice. I found myself wanting to know more about her. It wasn't until the second day of the trip, when we were all sitting around the campfire, that we actually spoke. She was telling a story, her eyes sparkling with excitement as she animatedly described something that happened back at school. I couldn't help but laugh, and for the first time, she turned her attention toward me. "You think that's funny?" she asked, a playful smile forming on her lips. "I think your story was hilarious," I replied, feeling a bit too awkward for my own liking. She chuckled and shrugged. "It's just one of those things, I guess. Not everything makes sense at the time." That was our first real conversation. From then on, we talked more. We'd sit together during meals, take long walks around the campgrounds, and somehow, we always ended up in the same group when we played games. The more I got to know Olivia, the more I realized how easy it was to be around her. She didn't try to impress anyone. She was just herself. Before I knew it, I started looking forward to every moment we spent together. Whether it was her sharing a funny story, or just being there next to me as we stared at the stars at night, I felt like I was the luckiest guy on the trip. I wanted to tell her how I felt, but I didn't know how to say it. Every time I opened my mouth, the words seemed to get stuck. But then something changed. The group went on a hike the third day, and we had to split into smaller teams. Olivia ended up with another guy from our school, Jake. I had seen Jake around. He was one of those guys who always had the attention of everyone around him. Charismatic, confident, the type of guy who always knew exactly what to say. He was everything I wasn't, and it wasn't long before I noticed how he and Olivia started to gravitate toward each other. At first, I tried not to think too much of it. After all, we were just friends, right? But as the day went on, I couldn't ignore the way Jake would throw an arm around Olivia's shoulders, or the way she would laugh a little too brightly at his jokes. There was something in the way she looked at him, something I didn't like. I thought maybe it was nothing, but deep down I knew. I knew I was losing her, even before anything had really started. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Jake, how easily he could make Olivia laugh, how effortlessly he seemed to charm everyone. Meanwhile, I just sat there, trying to come up with a way to tell her how I felt without looking like a fool. But the next day it all came crashing down. Olivia and I had a quiet conversation by the lake, away from the others. She seemed distant, distracted even. I tried to get her to talk, but it was like she wasn't really there. Then in a moment of silence, she turned to me. "I think Jake and I have a lot in common," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. My heart sank. I had always known deep down that something was changing. But hearing her say it out loud made it real. I tried to hide my disappointment, but I could feel it building up inside me. "That's great," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Jake's a good guy." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Yeah, he's really different. In a good way." I knew what she meant. He was everything I wasn't, confident, outgoing, and always in control. And as much as I hated to admit it, she was falling for him. I could see it now, in the way she would look at him when they talked, the way she'd laugh at his jokes like they were the funniest thing in the world. The next few days, things only got worse. Olivia started spending more and more time with Jake, and I felt like I was being pushed to the side. It hurt more than I cared to admit. It was like I was watching her slip away, and there was nothing I could do about it. And then it happened. One evening, after the campfire had died down and everyone had gone to bed, I found Olivia and Jake sitting on a bench talking in whispers. I didn't want to eavesdrop, but I couldn't help myself. I heard Jake's voice low and soft, and then Olivia's. Their words were just out of reach, but I could hear enough. I didn't think it would happen like this, Olivia said, her voice trembling just slightly. Jake's reply was barely a whisper. Neither did I, but we both know it's been building up for a while. And there it was. The moment I had been dreading. I knew what they were talking about. Olivia had chosen him. I wasn't angry, though. I didn't have the right to be. She hadn't done anything wrong, at least not in the way that mattered. She had feelings for Jake, and I had to accept that. But it didn't stop the pain that gnawed at me, or the ache in my chest that wouldn't go away. The next morning, Olivia came to find me. Her face was pale, and there was a nervousness in her eyes. She sat down next to me, avoiding my gaze. I think we should talk, she said softly. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. Yeah, we should. She hesitated for a moment, as if trying to find the right words. I'm sorry, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't want to hurt you. I looked at her, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. You didn't hurt me, Olivia, I said, even though I felt like I was being torn apart inside. You did what you had to do. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw the sadness in her eyes. But I still care about you, you know? You've been such a great friend. I nodded, even though the word friend cut deeper than anything else she could have said. I know, I replied, the words tasting bitter. Olivia stood up slowly, her hand reaching out toward me. I hope we can still be friends, she said softly. But I knew that things would never be the same between us. Not anymore. I watched her walk away, my heart heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. I wanted to hate Jake, to blame him for taking her away from me. But I couldn't. The truth was, Olivia had made her choice, and there was nothing I could do about it. I had known her my whole life. From the time we were little kids, we were inseparable. We used to play in the park, build secret forts out of blankets, and make up stories about how we'd be together forever. She was always the one who could make me laugh, the one who could make everything seem brighter. I'd never imagined life without her by my side. I guess growing up, things started changing without either of us realizing it. What had always been just a friendship started to feel different. It was like something inside me had shifted, like my feelings were no longer just friendly, but something deeper, something that ached every time I saw her. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The way her eyes sparkled when she laughed, the way her smile made my heart race. It wasn't just friendship. I was falling for her. One evening after school, we sat on the swings in the playground, like we used to when we were kids. The air was cool, and the evening sky was turning a shade of purple as the sun began to set. We talked about life, about the future, about all the things we still dreamed of doing. I had no idea how to begin, but my heart was pounding in my chest. I had to tell her. I had to let her know what I felt. Hey, I said nervously, my voice shaking just a little. I need to tell you something. Something important. She turned to look at me, her usual playful smile on her face, but there was a glimmer of concern in her eyes. What is it? She asked, her voice soft and gentle, just like it always had been. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing thoughts. I love you, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I have for a long time. I don't know when it happened exactly, but I can't pretend anymore. You mean everything to me. She was silent for a moment, her eyes wide, and I couldn't tell what she was thinking. My heart dropped in my chest. Had I said something wrong? Had I ruined everything? But then she smiled. It wasn't just the friendly smile I was used to. It was something deeper, something warm, and it made my heart soar. I love you too, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I've always loved you. And in that moment, everything felt right. It was like everything we'd ever shared had led to this. We were more than just friends now. We were something else, something beautiful. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had found the missing piece to my soul. We began dating soon after. It was like we were finally stepping into the future we'd always talked about. The future where we'd be together forever. Our friends saw us as the perfect couple, the ones who had always been meant to be. And for a while, it was perfect. We spent our days together, and our nights were filled with late-night talks and stolen kisses. But then, things changed. It happened so slowly that I didn't even notice it at first. She started pulling away. Not in huge ways, but in small, subtle ways. She'd cancel plans or show up late. Sometimes she'd seem distracted, like her mind was elsewhere. I tried to brush it off at first. Maybe she was just busy. Maybe something was on her mind. But I couldn't ignore it forever. Then one night, it all came crashing down. We had plans to meet at our favorite cafe after school. I showed up early like I always did, waiting for her with a smile on my face, excited to see her. But when she arrived, she wasn't alone. She was with him, one of our close friends. I didn't know what to say at first. I thought I was imagining things. But the way they were laughing together, the way they looked at each other, it felt wrong. It felt like I wasn't even there. We sat down together, but it was awkward. I could feel the tension in the air, the way my stomach twisted in knots. They kept talking, joking with each other as if I wasn't even in the room. My heart sank with every passing second. And then I saw it, the way she touched his arm, the way they shared a look that was intimate. My chest tightened, and I couldn't breathe. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice hoarse. She looked at me, her eyes wide, as if she hadn't realized what was happening. "What do you mean?" she asked, though I could see the guilt in her eyes, the way she avoided my gaze. I stood up, my hands shaking. "I saw the way you were looking at him," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You're with him, aren't you?" Her face fell. She stood up too, but didn't come closer. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean for this to happen, but I don't know, I got confused. I didn't know what I wanted." My heart shattered in that moment. The girl I had loved, the girl who had meant everything to me, had betrayed me. She had fallen for someone else, and I was the last to know. It was like my world had been ripped apart and I couldn't stop it. I didn't know what to say after that. There was nothing left to say. I turned and walked away, my mind a whirlwind of emotions, hurt, anger, betrayal, confusion. I couldn't understand how this had happened. How could she do this to me? How could she throw away everything we had for someone else? In the days that followed, I tried to move on. I tried to pretend like I was fine, like I wasn't dying inside. But every time I saw her with him, it felt like a knife to the chest. The pain never went away, and I realized that the girl I had loved for so long had changed, and she wasn't the same person anymore. We tried to stay friends, but it was never the same. The trust was gone, and the connection we once had was shattered. I don't know if she ever truly understood the depth of the hurt she caused, but I had to learn to live without her. It took a long time to heal, longer than I ever thought it would. I tried to move on, to let go of the past, but every time I thought I was ready, I would see her again, and everything would come rushing back. In the end, I had to let go of her, let go of the love I thought would last forever. But sometimes late at night, when I'm alone with my thoughts, I still think about her. I still wonder if there was something I missed, something I could have done differently. I'll tell you this story as if I'm the young man. It's not easy to relive it, but here it goes. It all started when I was browsing online one late evening. I had always been a bit of an introvert, not the best with social interactions, but somehow, the internet felt safer, easier. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just someone to talk to. And then there she was, Sophia. Her username caught my attention right away. It had something about books, a shared interest, and that made me message her. We started talking about everything. Books, music, our favorite movies. She was easy to talk to, funny, witty, and smart. Every conversation felt natural. We started talking more often every night, at first just casually. But as time went on, something shifted. The conversations became deeper, more personal. She told me about her life, her dreams, her fears, her hopes. I did the same. And then we began to open up about love. She said she'd been hurt before, that trust was hard for her. She told me that she didn't believe in love at first sight, but after getting to know me, she thought it might be real. I laughed at her and said the same thing. I had never believed in love like that either. We were just two people who found comfort in each other's words. But somewhere along the line it changed. I started to catch myself thinking about her more than I should. The way her messages made my heart race, how just hearing her type "hey" could make my day better. And then she told me something. "What if we met in person?" she asked. I froze. It had been months of online chats, but the idea of meeting face to face was terrifying. What if it wasn't the same? What if we didn't have the same connection in real life? Still, there was something in her words that made me say yes. We made plans to meet. The day of our meeting, I could barely contain my excitement. I was nervous too. Would she look the same? What if I wasn't what she expected? The possibilities ran through my mind in a blur. I arrived at the cafe first, heart pounding in my chest. I found a quiet corner and sat anxiously checking my phone. And then she walked in. She was even more beautiful than I imagined. Not in the way I'd pictured. No, she was more real. More human. The spark in her eyes, the way she smiled when she saw me, it was everything. She walked over, and for a moment neither of us knew what to say. We just sat there looking at each other. She said my name softly, like she was testing it out. But there was a weird vibe. Something off. It was subtle at first, but I couldn't ignore it. I shook it off, though. After all, this was the girl I'd spent hours talking to. The one who had shared so much with me. We ordered coffee and we talked more about our lives, our experiences, but there was this lingering feeling I couldn't shake. As we sat there, she excused herself to take a call. I waited, sipping my drink, trying to enjoy the moment, but my thoughts kept drifting. When she came back, she seemed different, more distant, distracted even. I couldn't put my finger on it. Then, as she sat down, her phone buzzed again. She didn't look at it right away, but I saw her glance at the screen. It was a message. She bit her lip, her face turning pale for just a second before she composed herself. I asked her if everything was okay. She said yes, but her voice didn't match her words. I could tell she was hiding something, but I didn't press her. And then everything unraveled in the most unexpected way. Her phone rang again, and this time she didn't answer it. But her screen lit up, and I caught a glimpse of the name on the message. It wasn't a name I recognized. My heart dropped as I saw it again. A familiar name that seemed out of place. The name of a man, someone she'd never mentioned to me before. I tried to shake it off. It didn't mean anything, right? But my mind couldn't stop racing. I needed to know. I asked her, "Who's that?" It was a simple question, but I was already bracing for something. She looked at me for a long time before her face softened. She didn't answer right away. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she said quietly. I felt a pit grow in my stomach as she continued, her words like ice cutting through me. "That's James," she said, her voice faltering. "We've been seeing each other." I was supposed to end it, but I couldn't. I didn't know how to tell you. The room felt like it was closing in on me. The walls seemed to get smaller. My mind was spinning, trying to process the words. James, another guy. This whole time, while I had been opening up to her, she had been seeing someone else? How could she have done this? She apologized over and over, saying that she had never meant to hurt me. But the damage was done. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I could have prepared for. I could feel the warmth of the coffee cup slipping from my hands, but I didn't even register it. I just stared at her, speechless. How could I have missed all the signs? How could I have been so blind? Her phone buzzed once more. This time she ignored it. "I'm sorry," she said again, her eyes filled with tears. But it was too late for apologies. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It didn't make sense. How had we gone from sharing our dreams and fears, talking about a future, to this? I couldn't stay there any longer. I stood up, not saying another word. I just turned and walked out of the cafe, feeling like the ground was beneath my feet, like everything had been an illusion, a lie. I didn't even want to hear her explanation anymore. I had to get away from it. From her, from everything. The hardest part was not how she betrayed me, but how much I had trusted her. How much I had let myself believe that love could come from just words, from just messages and pictures, from some kind of connection that only existed online. I never spoke to her again. I deleted everything, every message, every trace of her from my life. But the memory, the hurt, that stayed. It lingered in the back of my mind even as I tried to move on, even as I met new people. I guess that's the thing about love. It can feel real. So real when you're talking to someone every day. But reality? Reality is often a lot messier than we expect. I learned a lot that day. Not just about her, but about myself. And about what I really wanted in love. And in life. But that was my story with Sophia. A love affair that started online but ended in the harsh truth of betrayal. I remember the first time I saw her. It was my second year at university, and I had just moved to a new dorm. I wasn't really looking for anything serious, honestly. I was just trying to survive the stress of lectures and exams. Then one day in the university library, I saw her. She was sitting at a table near the windows, sunlight streaming in, creating this golden halo around her. She had this kind of effortless beauty that made my heart skip a beat. I couldn't stop looking at her, but I tried to play it cool. Our first conversation wasn't anything special, just a casual, "Do you mind if I sit here?" as I walked past her table. But when she looked up, those dark eyes met mine, and for a second I couldn't breathe. She smiled, and in that moment I swear the entire room disappeared. I didn't know it then, but that was the moment everything in my life started to change. We started talking more regularly after that. We were in some of the same classes, and we quickly became study partners. We'd meet in the library to go over notes, but before we knew it, our study sessions were turning into long conversations about our lives, dreams, fears, everything. I found myself looking forward to every moment we spent together, and soon it wasn't just about studying anymore. I was thinking about her when I woke up, when I went to sleep, during every spare moment in between. It didn't take long for us to start spending time outside of university, too. We went for walks in the park, got coffee at that little cafe near campus, and sometimes stayed up late just talking. I remember once we walked around the city for hours in the rain, just laughing about nothing. I never felt like this with anyone before. She was my best friend, my confidant, my everything. And it wasn't just me who felt it. She told me she felt the same way, that she had never felt this connection with anyone. So when we finally kissed, it was like the universe was telling me, yes, this is right. This is where you're supposed to be. But looking back now, I realize I was blind to the signs. She had this way of being perfect, of saying all the right things at the right time. But there were moments, small things that didn't add up. She'd get a text in the middle of the night and suddenly be distant. Sometimes she'd get a little too defensive when I asked simple questions. I dismissed them. I thought I was just being paranoid. I didn't want to question the beautiful thing we had. But the cracks started to show, and I ignored them. I wish I hadn't. It was about 3 months into our relationship when I met James, a guy from her philosophy class. He was charming, funny, and a little too familiar with her. At first I thought nothing of it. She had friends, right? But then I started noticing how she would talk to him more often, late at night, in private. She'd get these messages, and I'd see her smile in a way that wasn't quite for me. I know it sounds crazy, but there was this feeling deep in my gut, this nagging sense that something was off. I tried to ignore it. I didn't want to confront her without evidence. But then one evening everything changed. I was in the library, doing some work for an upcoming exam, and I ran into James. He was sitting at a desk, his phone in hand, looking a little nervous. "Hey man," I said, trying to be friendly. "How's it going?" He smiled, but there was something about it that made me uneasy. He quickly changed the subject. "Oh, you know, the usual. I think you and Sophie are getting serious, huh?" His words hit me like a ton of bricks. Sophie. It was like a switch flipped in my head. I couldn't get the image out of my mind. Her laughing with James, that spark in her eyes that she had never given me. My heart sank as I realized the truth. Something I had been too afraid to face. She was cheating on me. I knew it the moment I saw the look on his face. He wasn't just being friendly. He knew something I didn't. And I had this sickening feeling that I was the last to find out. I confronted her that night. We were at her apartment, and I couldn't hold it in any longer. I asked her if there was anything she needed to tell me, if there was something I didn't know. At first she played dumb, but the hesitation in her voice gave it away. "What do you mean?" she asked, looking at me with wide eyes, trying to act innocent. I couldn't do it anymore. I told her everything I had seen, the late-night messages, the way she looked at James, how they were always whispering when I wasn't around. She didn't deny it. She didn't even try to make an excuse. She just sat there staring at me, and then she said it. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way. I never meant to hurt you." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I didn't want to hear them. I wanted her to fight for us, to tell me it was a mistake, to say she chose me. But she didn't. She just apologized as if that would fix everything. I left. I didn't want to hear anymore. I didn't want to see her anymore. I was broken, but I couldn't let myself stay in that toxic situation any longer. It took a while to get over her. There were days when I still saw her face everywhere I went, when I couldn't help but wonder what could have been. But over time, I realized that the person I loved wasn't the woman she had become. It was the woman I had believed her to be. The woman who had laughed with me in the rain, who held my hand when I was scared, who made me believe in love. But love, I realized, isn't supposed to hurt like that. It isn't supposed to make you question your worth. And as much as it hurt, I knew I deserved someone who wouldn't break my heart like that. It wasn't easy. I still saw her on campus a few times, and it stung each time. But slowly I healed. I focused on my studies, on my friends, on myself. I had to learn how to trust again, how to open my heart without fear. I still think about her sometimes. The way she looked at me when we first met. That warmth in her eyes that made everything feel right. But now I know the truth. People change, and love isn't always what it seems. And even though it hurts, I'm stronger now, and I know I'm better off moving on. I hope one day she realizes what she lost. But for now, I'm focused on finding a love that's real. One that doesn't leave me questioning myself. One that makes me feel whole. Maybe that's the one thing she taught me. You can't stay in a relationship that doesn't lift you up, even if it's the hardest thing you'll ever do. I remember it like it was yesterday. The summer when everything felt possible. When the world was nothing but sunshine, laughter, and the feeling of her hand in mine. Her name was Emma. She was the girl I could never quite figure out, yet in a way I didn't need to. She was the one I saw when I closed my eyes. The girl who gave me my first taste of what love was supposed to feel like. Pure, wild and unfiltered. We met during our freshman year in high school. Just two kids thrown together by fate. I wasn't popular, not by any stretch, and she wasn't the girl that everyone was after. But she had something that drew me in, a quiet confidence. It was in the way she carried herself, as if she knew something the rest of us didn't. I liked how she was different, how she didn't care what others thought. We'd sit together in class whispering about everything and nothing. I'd steal glances when the teacher wasn't looking, always catching her gaze, those brown eyes that sparkled with mischief. She made me laugh. She made me forget all the stupid worries that consumed me as a teenager, the pressure to fit in, the uncertainty of who I was. With Emma, it was like I could breathe a little easier. We'd spend hours talking on the phone, texting late into the night, sharing our dreams and our fears. It was simple, but I loved it. She'd talk about everything she wanted to do. When we graduated, Paris, New York, the world. And I, naive as I was, just wanted to be the one beside her. I didn't need grand adventures. I just needed her. One day, out of nowhere, she kissed me. It wasn't like in the movies. It was soft, tentative, as though she was just as unsure as I was. But when her lips met mine, it was like the world stopped. Everything faded away, and in that moment, it was just us, two kids who had found something pure in the chaos of teenage life. I remember the rush I felt, the sense of something that had finally clicked into place. We spent the next few months inseparable. I was always at her house, or she was at mine, stealing moments, savoring every laugh, every touch. I believed that love at that age was as simple as it seemed. We made promises to each other, promises we thought we'd keep forever. I believed in them with every fiber of my being. But like all things, it changed. Emma started to drift. At first I thought it was just her busy schedule, the stress of school piling up. But then I noticed the little things. She'd cancel plans more often, leave my texts unanswered for hours. And when I did see her, there was this distance between us, a space I couldn't close no matter how hard I tried. I confronted her one night, when the weight of it all was too much to bear. She looked at me with a sadness I hadn't seen before, and then she told me something that shattered everything. I met someone else. I remember feeling like the ground had slipped from beneath me. My chest tightened, my thoughts jumbled. How could this happen? We were happy, or at least I thought we were. But there she was, standing in front of me, with tears in her eyes, telling me that the love we had wasn't enough. I couldn't make sense of it. I wanted to scream, to beg her to stay, to remind her of everything we'd shared. But I didn't. I just stood there feeling like the world had come crashing down. She tried to explain, to apologize, but it was clear. She had fallen for someone else, and for all my pain, I couldn't blame her. She was still so young, still figuring out what she wanted in life, but that didn't make the hurt go away. It wasn't like the movies, where the heartbroken lover gets over it in a montage of sad music and eventual healing. No, this hurt lingered. Every time I saw her with him, Every time I heard her name in passing, it felt like a slap in the face. I'd walk past her in the halls and she wouldn't even glance my way. It was as if we had never been, as if the love we shared had been erased in an instant. But the worst part? The worst part was that I didn't know how to let go. She had been my first love, and that kind of love doesn't just fade. I thought I would move on, but every memory, every shared moment we had kept dragging me back. I wanted to hate her for what she did. I wanted to be angry, to make her feel the same pain I felt. But deep down, I knew that wasn't fair. I loved her. I always would, even if she had chosen someone else. Time went on, and eventually we both moved into different circles. I stopped seeing her as much, and the pain of her betrayal, though it never fully went away, dulled over time. But I would lie if I said that it didn't still haunt me. Every relationship after her felt different. Not worse, but different. She had set a standard whether she meant to or not. I tried to find someone who made me feel the same way she did, but no one ever did. Sometimes when I think back to those days, I wonder if it was all a dream. Did it really happen, or did I make it up in my head? The laughter, the plans, the kisses that felt like the world would never end? I think it was real, even if it ended in heartbreak. Because no matter how much it hurt, I learned from it. I learned that love, especially the kind we had, isn't always enough to keep two people together. Sometimes people grow apart, or they change in ways you can't predict. And I learned that I could love someone with all my heart, but I couldn't make them love me the same way. And sometimes people will leave. Sometimes the best thing you can do is let them go, even when you want to hold on with everything you have. I never spoke to Emma again after that. She went on with her life, and I went on with mine. I suppose that's how these things go, when you're young and naive and think that love is all you need. But in the end, I think I'll always remember her. I'll remember the girl who was my first real love, and how for a little while, the world was perfect because of her. Even if it ended in betrayal, it doesn't take away from the fact that it was real. It was an ordinary Tuesday, or so I thought, when I walked into English class that day. I had no idea that this would be the moment my life would change forever. I was running a bit late, trying to dodge the crowd of students milling about in the hallways, but I somehow managed to slip into the room just as the bell rang. I scanned the room quickly, my eyes briefly pausing on a few familiar faces, people I'd known from previous classes, friends I'd grown up with. Then my gaze fell on her. She was sitting by the window near the back of the room, where the light seemed to make her glow. I couldn't explain it, but there was something about her that drew me in, even though I had never seen her before. Her long, dark hair framed her face perfectly, and she had this look in her eyes, soft yet intense, as if she was deep in thought. Her expression was calm, but there was something about the way she held herself that made my heart race, just a little. I sat down at my usual spot near the front of the class, trying to shake off the sudden butterflies that fluttered in my stomach. I wasn't the type to get distracted easily, but something about her presence was different. I couldn't stop glancing at her, as if she had a magnetic pull on me. And the strangest thing, I thought I saw her glance in my direction too. Just a flicker, a momentary meeting of eyes before we both looked away, like we were both trying to pretend nothing had happened. For the rest of the class, I couldn't focus on the lesson. I kept stealing glances at her from the corner of my eye. Every time I did, my heart skipped a beat, but I couldn't bring myself to look at her directly for too long. It felt too personal, too vulnerable, like she could see right through me, read every little thought in my head. I tried to concentrate on the lecture, tried to look like I was paying attention, but my mind kept drifting back to her. Her face, her eyes, the way her lips curled up ever so slightly when she was writing in her notebook. It was all so captivating. After class, I rushed to gather my things, but as I turned to leave, I almost bumped into her. She was standing right next to me, her hand holding the strap of her backpack, her face flushed. For a moment, we both froze. She looked at me for what felt like an eternity, and I couldn't bring myself to look away. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was the warmth in her eyes, or the quiet way she seemed to be waiting for me to say something. But I felt this surge of bravery rise up within me. Hey, I managed to say, my voice sounding a little too loud in the quiet hallway. She blinked as though she hadn't expected me to speak, but then she smiled. It was a small, shy smile, the kind that made my chest tighten. "Hi," she replied, her voice soft but clear. I felt like I was drowning in that moment. in the simplicity of her words and the way she made me feel. I wanted to say more, wanted to tell her how I'd been thinking about her since the second I'd seen her, but I couldn't find the right words. Instead, I just nodded awkwardly, offering a smile of my own. "See you tomorrow?" she asked, her voice tentative, almost as if she wasn't sure if I'd want to talk again. "Yeah," I said, almost too quickly, too eagerly. "I'll see you tomorrow." And then she was gone, slipping into the crowd of students, leaving me standing there in a daze. The entire walk home, I couldn't stop thinking about her. The sound of her voice, her smile, the way she looked at me, it was all so new, so different from anything I had ever experienced before. I wanted to know everything about her, but I was too shy to even ask her name. The next day, I tried to play it cool, act like I hadn't been thinking about her for hours on end, but it was impossible. Every time I walked into that classroom, I couldn't help but look for her. And sure enough, there she was, sitting by the window again, her hair falling softly around her face as she read her book. I was too scared to sit next to her, but I couldn't stop staring. I had never felt so drawn to someone in my life. Then, just as I thought she might notice, she turned her head and our eyes met again. For a moment, I swear time stood still. Neither of us said anything, but there was this unspoken connection between us. This quiet understanding that neither of us was willing to break just yet. And so that's how it started. The shy glances, the small moments we shared between classes, the way I'd feel a little lighter every time I saw her smile. We began to sit closer to each other in class, exchanging notes, sometimes talking in between lessons. I still couldn't bring myself to tell her how much I liked her, how much I wanted to know more about her, but every day, it felt like we were inching closer to something more. One afternoon after class, we walked together for the first time. It was the kind of walk that felt like it could last forever, quiet but comfortable, with just the soft murmur of passing conversations around us. She told me about her favorite books, the ones she read when she needed to escape from the world. I told her about the music I loved, how it helped me make sense of things I couldn't always put into words. And with every word that passed between us, I could feel the invisible thread between us tightening, pulling us closer. The days went by in a blur. I'd wake up excited for class, knowing that I'd see her again, that maybe, just maybe, today would be the day I'd finally work up the courage to tell her how I felt. But every time I saw her smile or heard her laugh, I was reminded that it wasn't just about the words. It was about the quiet moments, the subtle glances, the way she made me feel without even knowing it. And then one day, after what felt like months of quiet moments and stolen glances, I found myself standing in front of her, heart pounding in my chest, words finally tumbling out. "I think I like you," I said, my voice shaking. But there was no going back now. She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes soft and warm. And then, with a small smile, she replied, "I think I like you too." And just like that, everything changed. What started as a shy love story, built on exchanged glances and tentative smiles, had blossomed into something real, something I never could have expected. But in that moment, I knew one thing for sure: sometimes the quietest beginnings lead to the most beautiful endings. It was an ordinary day when I first stumbled across her profile. You know, the kind of day that feels like it's stretching on forever. When you're bored and aimlessly scrolling through your social media feed. I had been scrolling through Instagram, just looking at random pictures when I saw her post. It wasn't anything special, just a picture of her sitting in a park, reading a book with the sun shining down. But there was something about the way she looked, like she was completely lost in her own little world, comfortable in her own skin. Something just drew me to her, and I found myself staring at her profile for way longer than I should have. She had that kind of smile you can almost feel. And I thought, this girl is different, but I wasn't sure how to reach out to her. I didn't know if I should just like her photo or send a message. I mean, it was the classic dilemma, right? Do I take the leap, or do I just remain a quiet observer in the background?
For a while, I did nothing.
I told myself, she's probably already talking to someone, or I don't even know her. But the thought of her never quite left my mind. Eventually, I couldn't resist any longer. I sent her a message. It was simple. A little bit awkward, honestly, but that was me. "Hey, I saw your post. It's nice to see someone so into books and nature. What are you reading?" I didn't know what kind of response I expected. Maybe nothing at all. But then, to my surprise, she replied, "Hey, it's a book by an author I love. It's about human connections, actually. Funny how people can feel so close even without knowing each other, right? That reply, that little bit of insight hit me like a ton of bricks. I think I knew right then that we had something in common. A spark, or maybe just the way we saw the world. From that message on, we started chatting more. Every conversation felt like a step forward, even though we were still in the safe zone of virtual interaction. Our talks were light at first, books, movies, music, but gradually, they began to go deeper. We started sharing more of ourselves, our dreams, our fears, our little victories, and our struggles. We both had grown up in different places, but there was something about our shared experiences that made us feel like we had known each other for a lot longer. The text turned into long voice messages, and soon enough we were calling each other every night. It became a ritual, falling asleep to the sound of her voice, waking up to a good morning text from her. It felt like a love story unfolding, but neither of us was brave enough to say it out loud at first. And then one day, after weeks of talking, I suggested something crazy. What if we met in person? What do you think? My heart was racing when I sent that text. I mean, we had built this whole connection online, but what if it wasn't the same in real life? What if it was all in my head? Her reply came faster than I expected. I've been thinking about that too. I was wondering when we would do this. That was all I needed. We started planning our first meetup. There was so much excitement in the air, but also a little bit of nervousness. We didn't know how things would go. We had only seen each other through a screen after all. The idea of meeting her in person made my stomach twist with anticipation. Finally, the day arrived. I remember the moment I saw her. It felt like everything slowed down. She was just as beautiful as I had imagined, but there was something else about her presence that made my heart skip a beat. She was standing there in a little cafe holding a cup of coffee, looking around like she was nervous but also excited. When our eyes met, I swear I felt an electric jolt between us. We both smiled awkwardly, trying to make small talk, but the chemistry between us was undeniable. As we sat down, the awkwardness melted away. It was like we had been talking for years, and nothing about our connection had changed. We spent the whole afternoon together, talking about everything and nothing, just enjoying each other's company. I couldn't believe how easy it was, how natural it felt to be around her. I remember thinking, this is real. This is real life. I'm really here with her. As the days passed, we saw more of each other. Movies, dinners, walks in the park. The more time I spent with her, the more I realized just how much I cared. She wasn't just a girl from my phone anymore. She was someone I couldn't imagine my life without. It wasn't long before we officially became a couple. The transition from being virtual friends to real-life partners felt seamless, like we had been preparing for it all along. It was a journey of trust, of getting to know each other in ways that only time could reveal. We both understood the power of connection, of love, even when it started in the digital world. Now looking back, I can't help but feel grateful for that simple Instagram message. It started as a small spark, and over time, it turned into something bigger than I ever imagined. She's my best friend, my love, and the person I turn to in everything. Sometimes I think about how lucky I am that two people could find each other in such a vast world of virtual noise and turn it into something so real. And every time I hear her laugh or see the way she looks at me, I realize that this love story started on the screen, but it's only just beginning. It all started on a flight to a place I'd never even dreamed of visiting. I was heading to New Zealand for a conference, my first big work trip abroad. I was nervous, a little excited, and honestly, pretty damn tired. The flight was long, like really long, and it seemed like every minute dragged on. My eyes were heavy, but my mind was racing with everything I needed to do when I landed. You know how it goes. Work deadlines, emails piling up, and 1,000 things to keep me on edge. But little did I know, the next few days would turn into something I never could have imagined. She sat down next to me mid-flight, right as I was about to drift off. She was wearing a scarf that seemed far too warm for the plane, her hair tied in a loose braid, and she had this smile that somehow made everything feel lighter, even if I was still caught up in my own thoughts. I could see she was struggling with the overhead compartment, so I instinctively stood up and helped her. "Thanks," she said with a kind of sincerity that caught me off guard. I always forget how high these things are. I laughed, feeling a little awkward but trying to keep it cool. I think everyone does at first. We exchanged a few polite words before I sat back down, and then just like that I closed my eyes again, thinking that was the end of it. She was just another person on the plane, right? Nothing more. But she had this energy about her that I couldn't shake. It wasn't just her smile, it was something else. Like she was carrying a secret adventure in her eyes. A few hours into the flight, I noticed her again. She was reading a book, but she kept looking out the window, deep in thought. And then she startled me by speaking up. "Have you ever thought about how strange it is being so far away from home?" she asked, her voice breaking the silence between us. I glanced at her, not sure where this was coming from. "I guess I've thought about it. But I always focus on the things I'm supposed to do when I'm traveling. Work, meetings, all that. I don't really think about the distance." She nodded, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "I'm not sure what I'm doing here. I mean, I'm excited about this trip, but I don't know. I'm just not sure." Now that caught my attention. I'd been so focused on my own stuff, and now she was reminding me of the bigger picture, the randomness of life, and how far we all go to chase something, even if we don't know what it is. "Well," I said after a moment, "I guess sometimes it's not about knowing what you're doing, just about going, you know?" She smiled at me then, and there was this moment where I thought maybe, just maybe, we were two people on the same wavelength. But then, before I could say anything else, the flight attendants announced that we'd be landing soon, and that was that. Or so I thought. But as we were disembarking, she turned to me again. "You're going to that conference, right?" I nodded. "Yeah, I'm speaking about technology and business, and how it's changing the way companies interact with customers." Her face lit up, and she gave me a look that was half impressed, half playful. "I'm actually here on a different kind of business. I'm a writer, and I'm exploring ideas for my next novel. But I was thinking of doing something different while I'm here, something that'll get me out of my head. I've been looking into taking a trip to a remote part of the country." "Ever been to the mountains?" I couldn't believe it. She was talking about an adventure, something completely different from what I'd been planning to do, and for some reason it felt like an invitation. An invitation to break free from the constraints of my usual life and jump into something unpredictable. I hadn't even known her for more than a few hours, but something about her words struck a chord deep inside me. "You know, I've never done anything like that before," I said, the words slipping out before I could really think about them. "But I'm up for it. Let's do it." She raised an eyebrow, almost surprised but intrigued. "You're serious?" "Why not? It's a beautiful country and we're already here." That's how it started. Two strangers, who had barely exchanged more than a few words, suddenly deciding to take on an adventure together. We rented a car and headed to the mountains the next day, not knowing exactly what we were getting into, and that was the beauty of it. There were no plans, no set agenda, just us in the open road, with a map that barely seemed to matter. We spent the next week exploring places that felt like they were untouched by time. Forests so dense the sunlight barely filtered through, rivers that looked more like something out of a dream, and mountains that loomed like ancient guardians. We stayed in small, cozy cabins along the way, with nothing but each other's company and the sound of nature around us. We talked about everything and nothing, about our dreams, our pasts, what we wanted from life, and what we feared. Somewhere along the way, I realized how much I had been holding back from the world, and somehow, her adventurous spirit began to break down those walls. She made me see that life wasn't about sticking to the plan. It was about the moments you didn't expect. One night, sitting by the fire after a long day of hiking, she turned to me with a serious expression. "Do you ever think about the path you didn't take?" she asked. I looked at her, the firelight flickering in her eyes. "All the time," I admitted. "But I think that's what this trip is about. Finding out if I can still make a different choice." She smiled softly, and it felt like the weight of the world shifted for a moment. "Maybe this trip isn't just about work or stories or the next big thing," she said. "Maybe it's about realizing that we're all capable of starting over." And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just on a trip in a foreign land. I was on a journey of discovery. Not just about the world around me, but about myself. The mountains, the forests, the rivers, they all seemed like metaphors for what was happening inside me. And as we continued to share experiences, laugh and discover things together, it felt like I was becoming a different version of myself. By the time we finally made our way back to the city, I wasn't the same person who had boarded that flight days before. I had met someone who had opened my eyes to a world full of possibilities, and for the first time I wasn't afraid to face them. The truth is, we didn't end up together in a typical sense. The time we spent was fleeting, just a chapter in both of our lives. But in that chapter, we both found something we hadn't expected: freedom, connection, and a shared sense of adventure. And sometimes I think that's all life really needs: a little spontaneity, a leap of faith, and the courage to let the journey take you somewhere beautiful. You know, I never really expected to meet someone who would change everything for me in the most unexpected way. But that's exactly what happened. And it all started in this old building we both lived in. It's one of those places that has seen better days, but there's something comforting about it, like a second home. I had been living there for a while when she moved in. Her name was Emily. I didn't know much about her at first, just that she was new to the building. She didn't make much noise, kept to herself mostly, and I kind of liked that. I wasn't one for too much socializing either. I just liked to keep to myself and do my own thing. I'd seen her a few times in the hallway, but I never thought anything of it. Just another neighbor, you know. Then one day it was one of those lazy Sundays, the kind where the world feels like it's moving slower than usual. I was coming back from the little convenience store down the street, a bag of snacks in hand, and as I walked into the building, I saw her sitting on the steps of the staircase. She was holding a book, her nose buried in it, completely oblivious to the world around her. I didn't know why, but something made me pause. Maybe it was the fact that I recognized the book she was reading. It was one of my favorites, a novel I'd read a million times over. It wasn't a book most people knew, so seeing someone else with it was like a sign. Without thinking, I walked up to her and said, "Hey, that's a great book. Are you enjoying it?" She looked up, startled at first, but then smiled when she saw I wasn't a stranger. "Yeah, it's amazing." I didn't expect it to be so deep. We started talking about the book, and before I knew it, we were deep in conversation. It felt so easy. There was no awkwardness, no silence, just this natural flow of words. We found out that we shared so many other interests. Not just books, but music, films, even small quirky things, like our love for late-night walks and how we both secretly enjoyed the sound of rain tapping on windows. From that day on, we started to see each other more often. She'd pop into my apartment to borrow a book or to chat about a new movie we'd both watched. And sometimes I'd find her waiting outside on the steps, just wanting to talk or share a quiet moment. It became a routine, our friendship unfolding in the most natural way. The more we talked, the more I started to realize how much I enjoyed her company. She wasn't just easy to talk to. She made me feel like I was truly seen. I didn't have to pretend to be anyone else around her. And I saw the same in her. She'd always been shy, and I could tell she had a depth to her that not many people saw. But with me, she didn't hold back. I remember one evening as we were sitting together on the rooftop, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, I felt this shift. It wasn't just friendship anymore. My heart was starting to race whenever I saw her. There was this warmth in my chest that didn't exist before, this feeling that maybe, just maybe, I was falling for her. But I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I was afraid that saying it out loud would ruin everything. What if she didn't feel the same? What if it made things awkward and we lost this connection we'd built? It was easier to just enjoy being with her, without complicating things. I told myself it was fine. We were just friends. One night after a long day, I ran into her in the hallway, and we were both too tired to have a full conversation, so we just stood there awkwardly smiling at each other. She seemed hesitant, almost like she wanted to say something. I remember how her eyes lingered on mine, and for the briefest moment, everything went quiet. Then she spoke. "I think I'm falling for you," she said, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. I froze. My heart did this ridiculous flip in my chest. I wasn't sure if I was dreaming or if she had actually just said what I thought she did. I must have looked completely stunned because she quickly added, I'm sorry, that was probably too much, but I couldn't let her pull back. I took a step forward, gently holding her hands, and said, "No, it's not too much. I think I've been falling for you too, and I didn't know how to say it." Her face lit up like I'd just given her the world. And before I knew it, we were standing there, in the quiet hallway of our building, holding each other close. It felt surreal. Everything felt surreal. From that moment on, everything changed. We weren't just two people who lived in the same building anymore. We were something more. It was like all the moments we'd shared, all the little things we had in common, had led us to this point. I wasn't sure where this love would go, but I didn't need to. For the first time in my life, I felt certain that I wanted to be with her, and that was enough. And maybe, just maybe, it was the fact that we met in this building. This place that felt a little like home, that made everything feel even more magical. We were two people who had found each other in the most unexpected way, but in the end, it was all exactly where we were meant to be. As I sit here now, thinking back on it all, I can't help but smile. It's funny how life works sometimes. One moment, you're just another person in a building full of strangers, and the next, you're standing next to someone who makes you feel like you've found your home in their heart. It was the summer I'll never forget, the one that changed everything. I had just graduated college, and all I wanted was to get away from the hustle and bustle of everyday life, take a breather before the real world called me back. So I decided to spend the summer at a tourist resort on the coast. I wasn't exactly sure what to expect, but I figured it would be the perfect escape. Little did I know, it was about to become the backdrop of one of the most unforgettable chapters of my life. The first day I arrived at the resort, I was just another face among hundreds of others. Most of the guests were families or groups of friends, so I didn't really expect to meet anyone I'd connect with. But then I saw her. She was sitting by the pool reading a book. The kind of book you can't stop staring at, small, old. The kind that makes you wonder what kind of stories it holds. I couldn't tell you why, but there was something about her that caught my attention. Maybe it was the way the sunlight caught her hair, or the peaceful way she seemed to be lost in the pages. Something magnetic, something that drew me in. The next few days were a blur of sun, sand, and sightseeing. I went on a few tours around the island, but I never really expected to see her again. But life, it seems, has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. On one of the tours, we ended up on the same boat trip, some scenic cruise around the coastline. I had no idea she'd be there, but when I saw her standing by the rail, her eyes sparkling as she watched the water, it felt like fate was at play. I didn't want to seem too forward, but I couldn't help myself. I made my way over, offering a casual, "Hey, is this your first time here too?" She looked up at me, startled at first, then smiled. "Yeah, I'm just here for the summer," she said. "It's beautiful here, isn't it?" We got to talking and it felt so easy, so natural. We talked about everything, why we were there, where we were from, our dreams, our fears. I learned her name was Lily. She was from a small town across the country, studying literature and photography. She wasn't looking for anything serious, just an escape like me. But as we talked, I couldn't help but feel a connection growing between us. It wasn't love at first sight, but it was something deeper, something that felt like the start of something beautiful. We spent the next few days together, exploring the island, trying new foods, laughing at the silly things we did. One afternoon, we rented bicycles and rode along the coast, stopping every now and then to take pictures. We were both amazed by how easy it was to be around each other. I had always been the kind of guy who kept to myself, but with her it was different. She didn't need me to be anyone else. She saw me for who I was, and I saw her the same way. There was one moment, though, that stuck with me. We were sitting on the beach watching the sunset together. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, the waves gently lapping at the shore. She turned to me, her eyes glowing with the reflection of the sky, and said, "You know, I think I've always wanted something like this, someone to share moments with." In that moment, I realized something important. It wasn't just the sunset that was beautiful. It was being with her, sharing something so simple yet so meaningful. I hadn't expected to fall for her, not in this place, not with everything going on in my life, but I did. The next few weeks were filled with little adventures, getting lost in the markets, dancing to live music by the beach, staying up late talking under the stars. And as the days went by, I realized how much I was looking forward to our time together. It wasn't just about the places we visited or the experiences we shared. It was about the way she made me feel. She brought out the best in me. With her, I was more than just a tourist on vacation. I was someone who could feel truly alive. But as all vacations do, our time was limited. The end of the summer was approaching, and I could feel the pressure building. I had to face the reality that soon we'd have to go our separate ways. We had talked about it in passing, how we'd have to leave this magical place behind, how we'd return to our lives. But I couldn't stop thinking about what that meant for us. On our last night together, we went to a little cafe overlooking the ocean. The night was quiet, just the sound of the waves and the occasional laughter from nearby tables. We had dinner, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. I looked across the table at Lily, watching her smile, and realized I didn't want this to end. "I don't want to say goodbye," I confessed, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Lily's smile faded for a moment, and she reached across the table, her hand brushing mine. "I don't want to either," she said quietly. "But the thing about time is that it keeps moving, whether we want it to or not." We both knew what was coming. That night we didn't talk about the future. We didn't talk about goodbyes. We just shared the moment as we had so many times before. I held her hand and we watched the stars together, not worrying about what was next. When the morning came, it was hard to let go. We had one final walk along the beach, and I couldn't bring myself to say the words I knew I needed to say. But Lily spoke first, her voice soft but steady. "We'll always have this summer," she said. "This memory, and maybe one day our paths will cross again. Who knows?" It wasn't a promise, but it was enough. I knew that no matter where life took us, I would always remember her. That summer, those moments with her, they had changed me. She had changed me. We said our goodbyes, and I left the resort with a heavy heart, but also with a sense of peace. I hadn't expected to find love in a place like this, but sometimes love comes when you least expect it, and maybe, just maybe, that's the beauty of it.